When does duty end and friendship begin? When your best friend is dying 30 yards away calling your name and you're in command of men whose lives depend on taking the next position, what choice do you make? Is it leadership to sacrifice one man for the mission? Or is it cowardice dressed up as military necessity? Can you live with yourself after making that choice? Or does it hollow you out? Leave you walking through the rest of your life as a shell containing guilt and regret instead of a soul? I'm 98 years old, and I made that choice on June 6, 1944, on a beach in Normandy, and I've spent every day since wondering if I decided correctly. His name was Michael Patrick O'Brien, and he was my best friend from the time we were 6 years old until the moment I watched him fall and chose not to go to him. This is the hardest story I've ever told, the one I've avoided for 80 years, the one my children and grandchildren have asked about but I've never been able to speak aloud. But I'm running out of time, and the truth deserves to be told before I join Mike, wherever soldiers go when this life is done. My name is Richard Allen Thompson, and I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania called Easton, right on the Delaware River. Mike O'Brien lived 3 houses down from us, and we became inseparable from first grade onward. We were those friends who knew each other so well we could communicate without words, who finished each other's sentences, who got into trouble together and covered for each other and built our entire young lives around our friendship. We played baseball in the street, fished in the Delaware, built forts in the woods, talked about girls and dreams and futures that seemed limitless in the way they do when you're young and untouched by real tragedy. Mike was funny, irreverent, fearless in ways I never was. He'd be the one to suggest sneaking into the county fair or stealing apples from Old Man Henderson's orchard, and I'd be the one to go along despite my better judgment, because being with Mike meant being part of something larger than myself. When Pearl Harbor was attacked in December 1941, Mike and I were both 19, working at the Ingersoll Rand plant in town, building air compressors for the war effort. We could have stayed, could have claimed essential worker status and spent the war safely in Pennsylvania. But Mike insisted we had to enlist, had to do our part, had to be soldiers instead of factory workers. Rich, we can't sit this out while other guys are fighting and dying. We gotta go. Together. I wasn't as enthusiastic as Mike, wasn't as certain about the glory of war, but I couldn't let him go without me. We'd done everything together since we were 6. This would be no different. We enlisted in February 1942, requested assignment to the same unit, and through either luck or bureaucratic efficiency, ended up together in the same training company at Fort Benning, Georgia. We went through basic training side by side, learned to be infantrymen together, got promoted together to private first class. When our training battalion was assigned to the newly formed 116th Infantry Regiment, 29th Infantry Division, we stayed together, assigned to different squads in the same platoon. Mike joked that we were going to win the war together, come home heroes, marry sisters and raise our kids together. He had it all planned out, the future we'd build after we'd done our duty and survived the war. I went along with his plans like I always did, because Mike's optimism was infectious and believing in his vision was easier than confronting my own fears about what was coming. We shipped to England in September 1943 and spent months training for the invasion of Europe. The 29th Division was selected to be part of the first wave hitting Omaha Beach, and we knew that meant we'd be in for the worst of the fighting. The casualty estimates were sobering, 30 to 50% losses expected in the first wave, but Mike refused to believe either of us would be in that percentage. We're charmed, Rich. You and me, we're gonna walk through this war without a scratch. I feel it in my bones. I wanted to believe him, wanted to share his certainty, but I couldn't shake the dread that had been growing in my gut since we'd learned we'd be in the first assault wave. The night before D-Day, June 5, 1944, we were packed into the USS Charles Carroll with thousands of other soldiers, waiting for the order to load into the landing craft. Nobody slept. We were all too wired, too aware that the next day would be the most important and probably the most dangerous of our lives. Mike and I found a quiet corner on deck and talked through the night, sharing memories, making promises about what we'd do after the war, trying to distract ourselves from what was coming. At one point, Mike got serious in a way he rarely did, looked at me directly and said, "Rich, if something happens to me tomorrow, I need you to promise me something. Promise me you'll look after my family. Tell them I wasn't scared. Tell them I did my duty. Promise me you won't let them forget me." I tried to tell him nothing was going to happen to either of us. Tried to invoke his own optimism, but he shook his head. "Just promise me, Rich. I need to know someone will be there for them if I don't make it." So I promised, though the words felt like they were cursing us both. We loaded into the landing craft at 0400 hours on June 6th, a Higgins boat packed with 36 men from our platoon. Mike and I were in the middle of the boat, standing pressed against each other, holding our rifles, trying to keep our balance as the boat pitched and rolled in the rough sea. The naval bombardment had started. A sound like continuous thunder, shells screaming overhead toward the beach. The boat circled for what felt like hours, waiting for the signal to make our run to shore. Men were vomiting from seasickness and fear, praying, checking their equipment, staring at nothing. Mike kept up a steady stream of nervous chatter, trying to keep spirits up, making jokes that fell flat but that we appreciated anyway because they were normal. Were Mike being Mike, were a connection to who we'd been before this moment. Our boat made its run toward shore at 6:30, part of the first wave hitting Dog Green sector of Omaha Beach. Through the gap at the front where the ramp would drop, I could see the beach getting closer, could see the cliffs and the draws where the Germans had positioned their defenses. I could see other landing craft ahead of us, some making it to shore, others taking hits and sinking or burning. The naval bombardment had lifted, and for a moment there was an eerie silence, just the sound of the boat's engine and the waves. Then the German defenses opened up, and the silence shattered into hell. Machine gun fire hit the water around our boat, then hit the boat itself, rounds punching through the thin metal sides. Men started falling before the ramp even dropped, killed by bullets that penetrated the hull. The soldier in front of me took a round through the chest and collapsed, and I had to step over him to move forward. Then the ramp dropped, and the men at the front tried to get off the boat and into the water. The German machine guns had the ramp zeroed in, and they cut down the first 5 men before they could take a step. Bodies piled up in the opening, and those of us behind had to push past them or climb over them to get off the boat. I jumped over the side into waist-deep water, my equipment weighing me down, pulling me under. I fought back to the surface and started pushing toward shore, bullets hitting the water all around me. So many bullets the water was churned white. Mike was beside me, his face set in concentration, moving forward with the same determination he brought to everything. We were maybe 20 yards from the boat when a mortar round landed between us and the explosion threw me forward into shallower water. My ears were ringing, I couldn't hear anything, and for a moment I couldn't see anything through the water in my eyes and the smoke from the explosion. When my vision cleared, I saw Mike floating face down in the water behind me, not moving. I started to turn back, started to go to him, but a sergeant grabbed me and pulled me forward. "Keep moving, get to the beach, don't stop." I was being pushed forward by the mass of men behind me, by the current, by the chaos. I looked back and saw Mike still floating there. Saw the water around him turning red, and I called his name, but I couldn't hear my own voice over the ringing in my ears. Then I was in the surf, crawling onto the beach, throwing myself down behind a steel obstacle. And Mike was 30 yards behind me in the water, and I didn't know if he was alive or dead. The beach was absolute chaos, worse than anything we'd trained for or imagined. Men were dying everywhere, hit by machine gun fire and artillery and mortar rounds. The beach was covered with bodies, with wounded men calling for medics, with soldiers trying to find cover where there was none. German machine guns had interlocking fields of fire that covered every inch of sand, and artillery had the entire beach ranged. We were pinned down, unable to advance, taking casualties by the minute. And somewhere behind me, in the water or on the beach, Mike was either alive and needing help or dead and beyond help, and I didn't know which. I'd lost my rifle in the explosion, had to pick up one from a dead soldier. I looked around for my unit, for anyone I recognized, and found Sergeant Morrison organizing survivors behind a seawall about 50 yards away. I started to crawl toward him, staying as flat as possible, moving when the machine gun fire shifted to other targets. It took me 15 minutes to cover 50 yards, but I made it to the seawall and collapsed behind it, gasping for air, my entire body shaking from adrenaline and fear. Morrison was gathering men, trying to organize an assault on the draws that led off the beach, trying to do something besides just sit there and die. He saw me and grabbed my shoulder. "Thompson, where's your squad?" I tried to explain that I'd lost them, that we'd been scattered by the explosion, that Mike was back there somewhere. Morrison looked at me with hard eyes and said, "Forget about the scattered men. We need to move forward or we're all going to die here. Can you fight?" I nodded, unable to speak, and he assigned me to a makeshift squad of survivors from different units. For the next hour, we tried to move off the beach, tried to assault the German positions that were massacring us. Men fell around me, friends and strangers dying in ways that still haunt my nightmares. I fired my rifle at muzzle flashes in concrete bunkers, probably didn't hit anything, just tried to stay alive and keep moving forward. And through it all, I kept thinking about Mike, kept wondering if he was alive, if he was calling for me, if he was bleeding to death in the surf while I was trying to take some German pillbox. The guilt was overwhelming, crushing, making it hard to think or function. But I kept moving because Morrison kept ordering us forward, because stopping meant dying, because I didn't know what else to do. Around 800, we finally made it to the base of the bluffs and had some cover from the direct fire that had been shredding us on the beach. Morrison gathered about 20 of us, all that was left of what had been a full company, and told us we were going to assault up the draw and try to take out the German positions from the side. It was a desperate plan, probably suicidal, but staying on the beach was certain death, so desperate was our only option. He looked at each of us and said, "I know some of you are worried about friends who are still on the beach or in the water. I know you want to go back for them. But right now, the only way to help them is to take out these German positions so the next waves can get ashore. We push up this draw, we take those bunkers, we save thousands of men. We go back for individual wounded, we die, and everyone else dies too. Understand?" Everyone nodded, including me, though my heart was screaming at me to go back for Mike, to at least find out if he was alive. The assault up the draw was the longest 100 yards of my life. Germans were firing down on us from positions we couldn't see, and men were falling with every step. But we kept moving, kept firing, kept pushing forward because that's what infantry does. We reached the first German bunker and cleared it with grenades and rifle fire, then the second, then the third. Morrison was everywhere, directing fire, encouraging men, making split-second tactical decisions that probably saved our lives. And I was just following orders, moving when told to move, shooting when told to shoot, functioning on automatic because thinking too much would have paralyzed me with guilt and grief. By 0900, we'd cleared the draw and established a position that allowed follow-on waves to move inland without being massacred by the beach defenses. More troops were pouring ashore, and the beachhead was finally being established. Morrison gathered us together and told us we'd done well, that we'd probably saved hundreds or thousands of lives by taking those positions. Then he told us we were being pulled back to reorganize, that we'd link up with our parent units and get resupplied. If you got separated from friends during the landing, check with the aid stations and graves registration. But don't go wandering around looking for people. The beach is still under fire and we need every man we've got. I went immediately to the nearest aid station, a overwhelmed medical position in a crater where corpsmen were treating dozens of wounded men. I asked about Mike O'Brien, described him, gave his unit designation. The corpsman checked his list and shook his head. "Not here. Try the next aid station down the beach, or check with graves registration." I went to 3 more aid stations, got the same answer at each. Then I went to graves registration, an area where they'd collected bodies from the beach, organized them into rows, prepared them for burial. The exhausted sergeant was keeping records, writing down names and serial numbers from dog tags, trying to maintain some order in the chaos of death. I asked about Mike O'Brien, and the sergeant checked his list. "O'Brien, Michael P., Private First Class?" I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "He's here. Row 7, 15th from the left." He pointed toward the rows of bodies, and I walked toward them, my legs barely supporting me, my vision tunneling. I found row 7, counted 15 bodies, and there was Mike, lying on his back, his uniform soaked with blood and seawater, his eyes closed, his face peaceful. The mortar round that had exploded between us had sent shrapnel through his chest and abdomen, Wounds that probably killed him within minutes. He'd died in the water while I was crawling toward the seawall. Died calling my name, probably. Died alone because I'd chosen to move forward instead of going back for him. I knelt beside him and put my hand on his chest, the way you do to confirm someone's really gone. His body was cold, stiff, already beginning the process of decay that takes us all eventually. I stayed there for a long time, maybe 10 minutes, maybe an hour, I don't know. I talked to him, apologized for not coming back, told him I'd tried, that I'd wanted to help him but had been ordered forward, that I'd had to choose between friendship and duty, and I'd chosen duty and would regret it for the rest of my life. I told him I'd keep my promise, would look after his family, would tell them he'd been brave, would make sure they never forgot him, and I cried. Huge wrenching sobs that I couldn't control, mourning my friend and mourning the choice I'd made and mourning the innocence we'd had when we were kids in Easton, thinking life would be an adventure we'd share forever. Eventually someone came and told me I had to leave, that I needed to rejoin my unit, that the dead would be properly buried, but I couldn't stay with them. I stood up, took one last look at Mike and walked away. I didn't go to his burial, couldn't bear to watch them put him in the ground. I just went back to what was left of my unit and tried to keep functioning, tried to be a soldier instead of a grieving friend, tried to live with the weight of my choice. The question that's haunted me for 80 years is whether I made the right decision. Should I have gone back for Mike when I saw him floating in the water? Could I have saved him if I'd reached him immediately instead of crawling toward the seawall? Morrison would say no, that Mike was already dead or dying from the mortar shrapnel, that going back would have just meant 2 dead men instead of 1. The military would say I made the correct choice, prioritized the mission over individual casualties, did my duty as a soldier. But friendship doesn't care about military necessity or tactical priorities. Friendship says you don't leave your best friend dying in the water. You don't choose strategy over the person who's been your brother since you were 6 years old. I've replayed that moment thousands of times in my mind, that instant when I saw Mike floating in the water and had to decide whether to go to him or move forward toward the beach. In some versions, I go back, reach him, pull him to shore, save his life, and we finish the war together like we'd planned. In others, I go back and die beside him, 2 friends dying together instead of 1 dying alone. In still others, I make the same choice I made that day, move forward, survive, and live with the guilt forever. I don't know which version would have been better. I just know the one I lived has hollowed me out, has left me walking through life carrying Mike's ghost, wondering if he'd forgive me, or if he died hating me for abandoning him. I kept my promise to Mike. After the war, I went to visit his family in Easton, told them about their son's courage and sacrifice, told them he died quickly and without suffering, told them everything except the truth about how I'd left him floating in the water while I crawled to safety. His mother cried and thanked me for being with him, and I let her believe that lie because it was kinder than the truth. I stayed in touch with his family for years, sent Christmas cards, attended his father's funeral, maintained the connection because it was all I had left of Mike. But the guilt never faded, never lessened, never became manageable. It's been the constant companion of my life, the weight I've carried through marriage and children and career and old age. I wonder sometimes if I could have done both. Could have pulled Mike to shore and still made it to the seawall, still participated in the assault up the draw, still fulfilled my duty while saving my friend. But I know that's fantasy, that the chaos of Omaha Beach didn't allow for perfect solutions, that every choice that day was between bad options and worse options. I made the choice that kept me alive and probably helped the mission succeed, but that success came at the cost of my best friend's life, and I don't know if that trade was worth it. The men who survived Omaha Beach, we don't talk much about the choices we made, the friends we couldn't save, the moments when we chose survival over sacrifice or mission over individuals. Those choices are too painful, too morally complex, too impossible to explain to people who weren't there, but we carry them. All of us, the survivors who had to step over friends to move forward, who had to ignore calls for help because stopping meant dying, who had to prioritize mission success over individual lives. We carry those choices like stones in our hearts, and they never get lighter no matter how many years pass. I'm 98 years old now, and I know I don't have much time left. When I die, I'll face whatever judgment awaits, and I'll have to answer for the choice I made on June 6, 1944. I hope Mike understands. I hope he knows I wanted to save him, that I've mourned him every day since, that his death has marked me more profoundly than anything else in my long life. I hope he knows that even though I chose duty over friendship in that terrible moment, my friendship for him never wavered, never diminished, never ended. He's been with me every day for 80 years, a presence in my thoughts, a standard against which I've measured every subsequent choice, a reminder of what really matters in life. The day I saw my best friend fall was the day I learned what leadership really costs, what duty really demands, what surviving really means. It wasn't glorious or heroic or anything like what we'd imagined when we enlisted back in Pennsylvania, full of optimism and certainty. It was tragic and necessary and soul-destroying, and it's defined everything I've been since. Mike died and I lived, and that simple fact has been the central fact of my existence. Everything I've done, every choice I've made, every success I've achieved, has been shadowed by the knowledge that I'm only here because Mike isn't, that I crawled forward while he floated in the water, that I chose one way and he had no choice at all. I don't know if I made the right decision that day. I'll never know. All I know is that I made a decision and I've lived with the consequences, and I've tried to honor Mike's memory by living a life worthy of his sacrifice. I kept my promise, looked after his family, made sure he wasn't forgotten. I've told his story to my children and grandchildren, made sure they know about the friend who was like a brother to me, who died on a beach in France trying to free Europe from tyranny. That's all I can do, all any of us can do. Remember the fallen, honor their sacrifice, carry their memory forward, and try to live in ways that justify their deaths. If this story moved you, if it helped you understand the impossible choices soldiers face in combat, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe to hear more stories from World War II veterans. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Remember the men who died on Omaha Beach and all the other battlefields of that terrible war. Remember that they were someone's best friend, someone's son, someone's brother, and their loss echoes through generations. Thank you for listening to this old soldier's confession about the day he saw his best friend fall and the choice he's lived with ever since.